It's 12:01 p.m. here on the 28th of October. And let's do some introductions. I'm Chair Pete Peterson. Who else do we have with us here today?
Crystal Kennedy.
Crystal.
Jamie Allard.
Amy.
Forrest Dunbar.
Fantastic. So I believe we have a quorum. So we're going to be discussing email voting today. And that's the first item we have on our agenda. And we actually have some people. Susie Marshall is going to be joining us. And so she might have some technical expertise that she wants to share with us about email voting.
Pete, could we have a list of the people that are on the in the meeting that aren't assembly members? This is Barbara Jones, municipal clerk.
A list of the people who aren't assembly members?
Yes, please.
Okay, so if you're not an assembly member, introduce yourself.
Susie.
Oh, go ahead, Susie.
Okay, Susie Marshall, Chief Information Technology Officer.
Mark Merchant, Chief Information Security Officer.
Erica McConnell, Deputy Clerk for Elections.
Eugene Carl Haverman, Public.
This is Dean Gates, Assembly Council, also present.
Liz Edwards, Election Coordinator.
Amy Solberg is Election Assistant.
Okay, I believe that was everyone, Ms. Jones. So is someone giving us a presentation about email voting to start out today?
Well, I'd like to ask Erica McConnell, our Deputy Clerk of Elections, to give us a little introduction about why we're talking about voting by email.
Okay. Go ahead, Erica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk. So this had been raised at the last meeting for discussion because it had come up before the April 2020 election during some code changes. And we discussed last meeting that email and fax voting was added to the code in 2004, but at the beginning of 2020, the municipal IT department had raised concerns about the security of email voting. And we were unable, the assembly did not fully address those concerns during changes to Title 28 back in January of this year because we had already been accepting applications to vote by email for the 2020 election, but there was an agreement to continue discussing the issue. We had not done a comprehensive review of what happens in other states, but we did find that many states limit email and fax voting to what are called UCAVA voters, who are either people who live overseas or people who are in the military and posted overseas. So that was our recommendation to the committee, that the email voting be limited to, that we could still send out ballots by email, but that the return of ballots by fax or email, or by email, be limited to these UOCAVA voters. And the committee had some discussion last month and didn't sort of arrive at a consensus recommendation. And so we re-added it to the agenda for continued discussion this meeting. And suggested that we include the input from our municipal IT department, as they are certainly more cognizant of some of the security concerns.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Marshall, do you have some information you'd like to give us?
Sure. So we had raised the concern before. It was that there were two parts to it. One is that to request a ballot, filling out a form and having their PII, personal identification information, in an email to the clerk's office. So we were concerned initially about that form, as well as when people submit their actual ballot via email, is that we can't guarantee it doesn't get intercepted and altered en route. We have zero control over what happens from somebody's email outbox to when it comes into our inbox. And so if it gets intercepted and edited, we have no control over that, and we cannot guarantee that it wasn't. And so we were saying we can't guarantee that this ballot was not modified. So we were recommending we don't allow that because we can't secure it or validate that it is secure, that it came from that person. I'm not exactly sure what your process is to send the email to somebody, like validating that part of it on the clerk side. So I don't know how fraudulent that could be. No idea. So those were our concerns. And Mark Merchant, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you said it pretty simple. You know, I mean, as we all know, there's a lot of bad things going on with the Iranians and the Russians when it comes to elections, and so like Susie said, we're just unable at this time to be able to verify. There's the verification, the confidence that the emails that we're sending out and we're receiving, and then a lot of these are even bounce backs that would the intended precipitant I can't even say it, are not getting the actual emails. So they're being bounced back. So there's no verification that they're actually getting them. And then, no process for that.
So this is Barbara. I am sharing our application with you. And we went over this application with Susie and Mark last year. So it's been a year, but they did see this language. And so you can see it says it addresses some of the things that they brought up. I'm voluntarily waiving my right to a secret ballot. That happens for all voters that vote by fax or email. I'm potentially disclosing personal identifying information. And then we've had the voter assume the risk that the integrity of the ballot or a faulty transmission could occur, and that firewalls could isolate or strip the attachments, and that it's the voter's responsibility to follow up and confirm. So one of the things that's interesting about email voting, and it's a little bit different, email absentee voting, is that the voter has to apply to vote in this manner. And so when the voter applies to vote in this manner, you can see in the box ahead of time, we're looking for the voter ID, the last four of social, the date of birth, and the signature. And we're confirming all of that in the voter registration database. And then when the voter declaration, the ballot, is returned by email, we are again checking the voter ID, the signature on that to confirm that it's the same person. So although we have reported to the assembly about various issues regarding fraud, voting by email or fax has not been one of them. We've talked about voting by Facebook or voting, people that have voted, signed someone else's ballots. We've reported those to you, but we have not reported any issues with email or fax voting. I think the issues that Susie and Mark are talking about are the disclosing the personal identifying information, the integrity of the data, or a faulty transmission. And what we're trying to tell you is that we believe other jurisdictions that have limited this privilege to UOCAVA voters is probably a good way to limit this, but provide that service to voters or military and overseas voters who otherwise wouldn't be able to vote in our elections because they wouldn't get the ballot back in time.
Right.
So that's the balance that I think the Assembly has to decide as a policy matter.
And I just want to add just one part is that if somebody challenges the votes, like if they say, I challenge every one of those email votes, then what do? You say, I can't prove that it came from that person. I can't prove that, or I can't prove that they made those choices. I don't know. I'm just trying.
Susie, I would tell you that's what you could say about every single ballot that comes in by the mail. I can't prove that you made those choices either.
Yeah, but doesn't the U.S. Postal Service guarantee no tampering or something? I'm just saying, I think that was our concern was that if somebody said, hey, IT, certify this, we'll say we can't. And
no, we're not asking you to certify that.
Okay.
Okay. I see someone in the chat has said they want to have a comment, but I don't know who that is.
That's me.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Sorry, strange my name doesn't show up there. Well, yes, I would just add that the state had legislatures looking at a bill, HB 83. We talked about it a few times before, where they were going to allow votes by facsimile, but limited. And I wanted to mention that, like Ms. Jones mentioned, other jurisdictions are limiting electronic voting, casting the ballot by electronic voting, to only UOCAVA, I want to say that right, UOCAVA voters. And the state had a third version of that bill, and last February 10th, that was submitted. They had an additional change to it. That was this last sentence here, what I'm sharing. So the only voters that can return it by facsimile, and I guess they might extend that to email too, but actually in the regulations it allows email voting. But the bill was going to limit this electronic voting to only absent uniformed services voters, and they have the definition there, which tracks, I think, UOCAVA. Although I haven't checked this site, I'm going to make a guess there, that's UOCAVA. So the state, similar to other jurisdictions Ms. Jones looked at, was following suit. And so it just seems like for governments, policy-wise, the most common way to go in terms of limiting the ability for electronic voting. So I just wanted to add that. And we do have state regulations about electronic voting. I can't be an expert on it, but I've read it recently. It also has statements required on the application and the ballot package sent by electronic transmission that are similar to the statements on the form that Mrs. Jones showed you. That is our form. So I think that we're kind of on top of all the cutting edge issues with electronic voting here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gates. And I've got a question. And I'm not a technical expert, so if someone is emailing us a vote, is it possible that something could come along with that email and infect our election system and the information we have, our registered voters, and get in there and cause problems, or maybe even change people's registrations or something? Is that possible?
It is not possible, Mr. Peterson. The reason that we invited Susie Marshall and Mark Merchant is because they manage the MOA network. Email is part of the MOA network. The MOA IT group does not manage the systems that the municipality uses for voting. We have the Fluent system at the election center, which is not networked to the email voting system. And we have the Dominion system, which is also not networked. So they are not connected systems. But Susie can answer your other question. If those emails could possibly infect the Muni email system, which is why they're blocked. But I think Susie can answer more of that for you.
Okay.
Mark,
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Go ahead, Susie.
okay, thanks. Mark, do you want to talk about how we protect our email from the bad guys?
Sure. Sure. Currently, we have an application called, we utilize Proofpoint, and it's a spam filtering for emails specifically. We have, of course, a litany of other controls in place for URL filtering, that type of stuff. But for email specific stuff, if there are known bad sites that are coming in, or they're considered spam, or they're marked as spam or malicious, through Proofpoint, and they have a huge global database of this type of stuff that they modify daily. If it's marked as known bad, then it is filtered, and or the attachments are stripped as it comes into the MOA system. So if someone on the outside did get a hold of it and they were trying, it would be no different than any other phishing attack. There are external IP addresses that are filtered from sending into the MOA. There are domains that are filtered from being sent to the MOA. And then on top of that, if links are clicked to a malicious site, then we have another layer of defense that is known as DNS filtering, that will block access or to known bad sites. And we have that through our MSISAC, which is the Multi-State Information Sharing Analysis Center. So we have a lot of different tools in place that can help us keep the bad guys out.
Well, great. Thanks for that, Mark. And that there's reports in the news that the Iranians have actually got into some voters' information in a couple of states. Now, I don't know which states those were, or if that's been verified or not, but it's good to know that we've gone as far as we can technologically to protect our electoral system, because it's important that the voters have faith in that our system is secure. So, do we have any more information or additional comments or questions about email voting? I don't hear anything from any of the members of the committee. So I guess we can move down to the next item on our agenda. What are we talking about next, Erica?
Mr. Chair, the only other item on the agenda was a report on the Juneau election. The Juneau election has been completed and certified by the City and Borough of Juneau's Canvas Review Board. we feel that it was and I think they feel that it was a very successful election, and they had a voter turnout of 42.7%, which I think was the highest turnout for them in the last 20 years. So everything is over, and we processed, looks like 11,875 ballots. And so we are pleased to report a successful collaboration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's fantastic. 42.7% turnout. That's probably a record or close to it. I see Mr. Dunbar has a question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Erica or for Barbara, is the sense with Juneau that they might want to do this again next year, or was this a one-time thing because of the pandemic? And then given the success that they seem to have enjoyed, has this bolstered our conversations with any other jurisdictions about them using our machinery?
Facilities.
Through the chair, Mr. Dunbar, the feedback that we've had from the city and borough of Juneau at this point is that there may be interest in continuing this partnership, but it will really depend on funding and budgets. They were able to use CARES Act funding for this year's election, and so how they choose to allocate future budgets in terms of how much they're going to spend on the election is to be determined in the future. And I will refer the second half of the question to Ms. Jones.
I'm not sure what, the second half was for other jurisdictions?
That's right.
You know, we haven't heard from other jurisdictions. You know, the state has asked us. We've deployed a number of drop boxes throughout the city and the state. We've done some other things for the state. I think the team is answering tons of phone calls every day, directing the public to the state, to the drop boxes, to their polling locations. So we have a great partnership with them, but nothing particularly formal at this time.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
No, that's all, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And so so we actually didn't charge Juneau to help out with this election. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, we had an agreement with them that they would pay for supplies, the costs of any election workers that we had to bring in to assist, and any overtime of our core team, but that they did not pay for the time of the core team or cover any sort of overhead costs.
All right, so we're just trying to break even on helping them with their election, if I'm understanding that correctly.
I would say that's a good point, Mr. Peterson. Not only did we break even, but we had an awesome training exercise, right, Erica?
Yes.
Fantastic. So we got some new election workers, got some training and some practical experience. So that's good for elections that are here in the next few months. I see Ms. Kennedy has got a question. Go ahead, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious, not that it has any impact here, but when you were going through the different ballots and that, what kind of challenges and hiccups in that did you find with their mail-in ballots? And particularly, I wanted to know more about the ones that you could just not couldn't verify who they came from, couldn't verify signatures. So could you speak a little bit to just kind of the actual result of the valid ballots? Thanks.
Through the chair, Ms. Kennedy, due to the timing of Juneau's decision about when they voted on going to vote by mail, the state was unable to provide us with a database of voter signatures from Juneau registered voters as they do for our municipal elections. So we undertook a project to scan the poll books for Juneau elections for the last 3 years, and we were able to use the signatures from those poll books through our Fluent system to evaluate signatures, but that covered maybe 40 to 45% of the ballots that we were reviewing. So for the ballots where there was no signature from the poll book, we had to use the state's voter registration system to evaluate signatures. And one of the challenges that we faced is that the state system only shows the 3 most recent signatures that have been entered into the system. For a lot of cases, there are actually more signatures for a lot of voters. And when the state downloads those signatures for us for our Anchorage elections, we get all of the signatures that are in the system. So it can be 5 or 6 or 7 in some cases, but you can't view those through the state's voter registration system. So we were challenged in that a lot of times we were evaluating a voter signature against not very many reference signatures, which is always makes it more difficult, especially for those individuals who have signatures that can vary. The other sort of issue that came into play was that Juneau has a witness signature requirement for their ballots. So while they did pass an emergency ordinance that said a witness signature was not required, the majority of ballots that were submitted did have a witness signature. So while our signature adjudication did have a higher percentage of non-matching signatures than is the case for was the case for our most recent Anchorage election. And again, I attribute that to not having as many reference signatures to compare it to. The City and Borough of Juneau made a determination that if there was a witness signature on the ballot, they would accept it, whether or not the signature was determined to be matching the reference signature. So because of that, the number of ballots that were rejected for not matching the signature was extremely low. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Yeah, that's so you had to sort of make some adjustments on the fly a little bit with this Juneau election, but sounds like it went off pretty well when it was all said and done.
Mr. Peterson, I would say that is the case. We did have to make some adjustments on the fly, but it all ended up working out smoothly. We have an excellent relationship with the City and Borough Clerk in Juneau and her staff. We were in constant communication with them every day. We exchanged a great deal of information through our secure FTP site, because we were exchanging confidential or information that had confidential personal information on it. And so we were able to overcome any little bumps that we found. And again, I felt like it all went very smoothly. And
so there weren't any of the races that were close enough to where they needed to do a recount or anything?
Mr. Chair, there were no close races. So even though by the time their initial results were published, they only had about 68% of ballots processed. Nothing was close enough that there were any changes by the time the last ballots were processed.
All right, great. Sounds good. Fantastic. Okay. Any other discussions here? And we still have old business on our agenda. Has the group that's been working on charter changes done anything since our most recent meeting last month?
Mr. Chair, we have bit the dust on that project for a couple of reasons, primarily due to the fact that Mr. Dunbar has recused himself from that matter because he's running for mayor, and Ms. Quinn Davidson is no longer on the committee. So that project is just sitting aside. Erica and Dean and I have a meeting to resuscitate it tomorrow. And we'll talk about that and bring it back and see if we can find a new person who might be interested in taking a look at that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones. We have a question from Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is less a question and more a suggestion for you and working with the clerk. And I'm sure it's something you've already thought about. But I think we should try to add another member or two to this committee. I have been trying to sort of extricate myself from this committee for several months, but because of my mayoral run, and I think increasingly things that will come to this committee, I really can't take an active part in. But I recognize that, you know, there are quorum requirements and there are other things that we need to work on. But if you can find a couple of other folks, I think you should speak to Mr. Rivera, our new chair, or Mr. Weddleton, our new acting vice chair, and see if there are members that were willing to step up for this committee. I think probably 2 new members, because again, I'm becoming less useful, if I ever was, and Ms. Quinn Davidson is obviously not part of this committee for the next, you know, probably 6 or 7 months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. And that, see how that makes sense. We'll have to talk to a couple of our colleagues to see if anyone was interested in joining this committee. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair?
Is that Ms. Kennedy?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Well, yeah, do you have somebody in the queue that actually signed in? Okay, I guess not. So I didn't want to step in front of anybody. But one of the things that I kind of wanted to mention, and I know we're really not going to have any big discussion about it, but it was kind of interesting in terms of what happened to the result that came out of the decision that came from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court last week regarding signatures, since we're kind of talking about signatures. And that was that they basically ruled that you can't deny a ballot because of the inability to fully recognize it as the voter's signature. One of the things that I think would, if that were to become an issue here, I think one of the things that we could do would be to have that signature witnessed, like they do on the state's absentee ballots. So I guess I just kind of wanted to throw that out there and see if there were any concerns or comments. It was just a very interesting decision, considering that we rely here, you know, in the municipality so heavily on a signature. So thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. And I see Mr. Dunbar's back in the queue. Go ahead, Forrest.
Mr. Chair, I
excuse me.
apologize, but could I respond to Ms. Kennedy before we move on?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Donald.
Partially respond, but yes, if you have better expertise on this, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I did review the Supreme Court decision from Pennsylvania, and their main reason for saying that you couldn't reject a ballot for a non-matching signature was because that was not a standard within Pennsylvania election law that allowed for the rejection of ballots. Whereas in our municipal code, we do specifically say that the signature on the return envelope has to be a valid signature, and we discuss what a valid signature means in code at 2870.030C. So while I think we're always interested in beefing up our election standards, it does appear that in that Pennsylvania situation, it was because they hadn't added that to their election law as a valid reason for rejecting an envelope, whereas we do particularly have that in code as a valid reason for rejecting an envelope.
Okay, well, thank you for that additional information, Ms. McConnell. Do you still have a question or a comment, Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I think so. A couple of comments and then a question. I think that even beyond what Ms. McConnell said, well, first of all, I would say that I don't think that having a witness signature is a profitable road to go down, because I think that Alaska law is now turning against that requirement at the state level has been found to be arbitrary and not really serve a rational basis. Or maybe it serves a rational basis, but it's outweighed in times of pandemics, certainly. And so I don't think that is really the direction we should go. But on the other hand, I don't think, and Ms. Jones can maybe speak to this, but I'd always conceptualize the signature requirement as not so much something that would validate the ballot as give us a tool to figure out whether or not it was the person that they purport to be. That is to say, you know, they go through this review process. The vast majority of ballots go through, are not rejected, and then some of them are flagged, but then we actually follow up, unlike the state, and sort of proactively give the voters a right to cure. So it flags them, and then we take that and we say, okay, let's contact this person and figure out if this is actually them. Am I misunderstanding the way we actually use signatures, Ms. Jones?
That sounds very good, Mr. Dunbar. That sounded correct.
So would we ever just throw out a ballot because it looked like the signature was wrong? Or would we, you know, perhaps only after we took a lot of steps to try to get a hold of that person and ask them the question, was this you?
Mr. Dunbar, there are a bunch of provisions in code, like a missing signature, a no signature match. Those ones are really clear that we allow someone to cure. Let me give you one example that I reported to you 2 years ago. Dad called me up and said, I signed my daughter's ballot. She's in the hospital in Seattle for cancer treatment. So we pulled daughter's ballot, and we pulled dad's ballot too, and the signatures were identical, but it was good. It passed, and his was close enough to hers that it was valid for her. So then what we did is we called the daughter to find out. I can't invalidate the daughter's ballot because the dad says he signed it. She's the one that has to make that decision. And she never got back to us. So we went to the commission with that decision, and the commission chose to reject her ballot. So that's not a decision that we make. But in that circumstance, we do not send an opportunity to cure to someone where there is a potential for fraud. So I just want to make sure that you understand that we recognize where there are potential issues. Missing signature no match, absolutely. Those people have a right to cure. But in this circumstance, there is no right to cure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. I see Miss Allard has got her hand up.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess this could go to Barbara. So Barbara, maybe I got information or I heard it incorrectly. So my signature is kind of funky. So like on my driver's license, for example, it's Jamie Allen and then my maiden name, Del Fiero Allard. And that's just way too long. And I never sign my name like that. It's usually Jamie D. Allard or J. Allard. And I don't actually recall ever keeping my name to the way it should be when I sign my ballot or the way it's on my driver's license. And I've never gotten a call. Not that that's bad. Don't think that. My question is, so when ballots come in, we don't sit there and take every single ballot and match it to the driver's license signature. I mean, there's no way we have time for that, do we?
Yep.
And
Yes,
then I have a follow-up.
yes, we do. And it's not necessarily the driver's license. It's the signature on file from the State of Alaska Division of Elections. And it is a really interesting process. Crystal, have you seen the signature verification process?
She has. She's
Yes,
the one that told me about.
Okay. And so I think Forrest has and Pete has, we've done some tours. So the process of signature verification is that every signature on every single envelope is reviewed by two people. And it's supposed to be a blind review or like a supervisory review so that you don't know what the previous person reviewed it as. Because obviously, if it's a close call and you see that they reviewed it as good, you're going to say, oh, well, I'll do it as good too. So every single signature is reviewed twice. There are a couple of rules in state law that say, for example, if somebody signs Barb Jones and my name in the database is Barbara, that is okay. If I sign Barb Jones Bradbury and my name in the database is Barb Jones, it still may be okay. The state law says that reasonable nicknames or hyphenated names are allowable. So those are not exceptions that cause signature rejections. What we're looking for in all signatures, we have a standard that we use that we were taught by the Washington State Troopers, and it's ACE. We analyze, we compare, and we evaluate. And so we all have to take that training before we can do signature evaluation. And then what we're looking for is characteristics in each signature or different parts of the signature that demonstrate that it's an authentic signature belonging to the person who wrote the signature on file.
Okay, so just to clarify, we do sit down and it's a two-person check that they take every single ballot that comes through and they do a signature check how you guys were taught. And then when that person's done, a second person looks at it. And this is, I don't know how many ballots, 70,000 ballots. We have a team of people that go through every single one of them. And then whether it's approved or not, those two decide. And then it kind of goes into a question of, should we call the person? Is it like you do the follow-up? So then what I'm saying is, so we are allowed to sign our ballots in a way that it could be not actually our actual signature per se. So it is open to interpretation when it comes to voter fraud. I personally have gotten numerous ballots at my house for the past 3 years. I've tried to report it to the municipality, to Department of Elections, and I keep getting these persons' ballots at my house. And they don't stop. So they were military years and years ago. So I kind of feel like it's mail-in ballots can be open to voter fraud. But I would like to just say in closing, because I want to take up everybody's time, I need to come down. I need to go through, and I didn't because of the COVID, and I know that it's been a lot lately since I've been elected, but I would also like to come down, Barbara, when the first time is available that we do have and see that process. If that's okay with you guys. I could be a while, obviously. It might not be till April, but I would like to do that.
So I think there are a couple of things that I should just clarify is, first of all, we are verifying the signature on the envelope. It's not, there's no signature on the ballot. My husband does complain that his wife's signature is on the ballot, but that's because I'm the clerk, and it's true, my signature is on all the ballots, but there are no other signatures on the ballots. So we're verifying the signature on the envelope, the outside of the envelope. And yes,
Okay.
we do it once, and then we do it a second time. The code requires every no signature match or no signature, as Mr. Dunbar said, it's mandatory that those voters get an opportunity to cure letter within 3 days of processing their envelope. So that's mandatory under the code. If the envelope is determined to be no signature match, all of those envelopes go to the commission, and the commission ultimately makes the decision whether or not to reject those envelopes. As far as the envelopes that you're getting and receiving at your home, I can tell you the municipality uses the state of Alaska voter registration database. I think that we all know that there are a lot of voters in the database who do not live in Alaska. I think Gail Fanumii indicated that we have over 100% of the adult population in Alaska is registered to vote, which we know is not accurate. We have over 235,000 registered voters in Anchorage, while our population is only like about 299,000. So the Assembly has made a policy decision not to require us to mail envelopes to voters whose address is undeliverable. So it is critically important to us. And we took Crystal and Jamie's suggestions on the postcard that's going out that says, please return these ballot envelopes, these postcards to us with not at this address. When a voter spoke the other night at the Assembly meeting and said something about receiving unwanted mail, we contacted those people and said, please return those to us. When we get the returned mail to the MOA elections team, we process those return envelopes and the return postcards, and we give a file of undeliverables to the state of Alaska. And we ask the state to enter that data into the state's database. And then for our next election, when we download the database, if those voters are undeliverable, they will not be sent a ballot. But one of the things that I've talked to you about before is that we should probably invite the state of Alaska to come and talk to you about how the purging of that database works. And they can explain to you the statutory limits that they have from removing those voters from the database. The best that we can do is get them marked undeliverable. And the way to do that is for our voters to keep returning those envelopes and postcards to us undeliverable. And all we can do is ask the state to please mark them that way in the database. So I think that probably should have addressed your questions, Ms. Allard.
It did. Thank you. I appreciate it, Barbara.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Jones and Ms. Allard. Did you have any additional questions, Jamie?
No, not at this time. I appreciate it. She's right. I just need to go down there and see it, how it's done to get a better understanding. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I was there when the troopers from the state of Washington were giving the training And I have to tell you, it was pretty amazing the differences, very, very subtle differences in signatures that they were pointing out that showed that it was probably not written by the same person. And then you got a chance to sort of take a look at your own signature, and they would point out to you, oh, you make your J's like this or your P's like that, which, you know, most of us been signing our signatures for so long we don't even think about it anymore. And so some of us may have learned to write cursively different than others of us did. And so that's why there's obviously differences from one signature to the next. Anyway, do we have any additional comments or questions about items that were on our agenda today, or any old business that we didn't complete in previous meetings that someone might want to bring back up? Not seeing anyone in the queue, I think we might be ready for audience participation. Is there someone in the audience who would like to participate?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Haven, go ahead.
Good evening. Good afternoon, excuse me. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I follow the public process. When the public process is done appropriately, a decision made by the governing body is more likely in the public interest. First note, with regard to the meeting, as you know, many of your committees are listed on the committee website, including your committee, and most have what we call a web page for the individual committees. This particular committee, there is no web page assigned. The end result is looking for any agenda or whatever that you have for the public to see. We are blinded from obtaining that information. You get the information you're sending among yourselves through the clerk and so forth, but we're blinded to that scenario. You yet to set up a web page for the committee like you do with most of the other committees that you have. And that's critically important. Second is you've got a number of, you have on the agenda, continued public hearing, dealing with elections, changing law and so forth. You have those items going for public hearing, but you have this practice of your committee meetings where there's no web page assigned for this committee. So you're having your conversations, and it's a standard for me to attend your meetings, as you know. And so when, like the last meeting of this semi-ethics committee, before this one, Barbara Jones had some materials, and the references to whatever was said, the public was blind to see what was going on. And also the reference that I said in the committee meeting earlier today, not this one, the assembly, these team meetings, the public can connect audio listening to you respectfully, but you are seeing each other in a team scenario that the public does not have that a proper way of doing things for the public to see. And you need to connect the public so that if there's any documents going through, it's not the sidebar on the web page scenario, but that team connection. Also, in closing, I'd like to remind you that I addressed before, and I appreciate Assembly Member Kennedy following through with my remarks and says we should do that. These boards and these committee meetings should be at the Assembly chambers. And there was a commitment made by the clerk that they needed to do a test case and would happen by the middle of October of one of the committees. Well, that's yet to happen. We're moving in November. And note this, you've got work sessions dealing with the budget and so forth. And you would think that you're dealing with budget stuff at hearings and closing, and you're still running those work session stuff remotely, and you're expecting the public to be connected. And thank you for your patience and time, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. And I don't know whether I'm supposed to be putting that website together. Obviously, I'm not the person with the technical skills to do that, but it probably would be great if we if we did have a web presence out there for this committee, and I'm not sure why we haven't done that earlier. But I don't know, is that something, who does the webs for the other committees?
Mr.
That
Chair.
is a staffing issue, Mr. Peterson. And, you know, right now, I can just tell you the clerk staff is just overwhelmed with work. And we don't have the staff to do that.
Okay, well, we'll put that on the back burner right now. And if we ever feel like we're caught up, which I don't know if that'll ever happen, but we'll work on this at some point in the future. Any other comments from committee members? If not, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.